Hello, my name is Rachel Marsh with Colorado Christian University. This is Economic Analysis and Policy 601 with Professor Connie Ostwald. Today is November 6th, 2022, and this is an economic analysis presentation of Venezuela from a biblical worldview. Alright, so quick background of our agenda. We'll be going through our economic analysis, government, fiscal, and monetary policy, the impact of current issues on the economy, trade, exports, and imports, and recommendations for economic development. Alright, so quick background of Venezuela. The official name is the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Some information about the geography, people, and society. Major natural resources include petroleum and natural gas, iron ore, hydropower, diamonds, and bauxite. It is one of the world's largest proven oil reserves as of the 2022 from the Department of State. And it is located in South America. The population is approximately about 30 million, with a steady growth rate of about 2.4% from the World Fact Book this year. Quick fact about the religion is that it is 98% Christian with about 2% other. Back through the 40s through the 70s, Venezuela was at one time one of the largest petroleum exporters. But due to fluctuations in global oil prices through the 80s and 90s, Venezuela experienced this global economic recession that many other countries experienced as well. And in Venezuela, due to a mismanagement of these resources and over-leveraging their foreign debts, this led to high unemployment and in addition to their increasing population. So this put a even greater strain on Venezuela's already scarce limited resources. So through the 2000s and the 2010s, their president Chavez strongly advocated for greater socialist economic practices to offset some of this growing poverty levels and some of their extreme unemployment, which was then continued by the current president Maduro from 2013 into the present day. Alright, so we're going to go into a quick economic analysis for part 1. Alright, for our economic analysis, 3 major macroeconomic percentages were considered, including the GDP growth rate, the inflation rate, and the unemployment rate. As of 2021 through 2022, 1.5% was captured for the GDP growth rate, the total rate. Ideally, this should be between 2.5% to 5%, and so 1.5% is on the right track, but it could use some significant improvement. Due to continued political unrest as well as ongoing economic struggle following the COVID-19 pandemic, GDP was not properly captured through 2021 as far as the World Bank was concerned. And then post 2014, due to political unrest, it has continued to be hard to actually gather that information safely without influence from the media and also from corrupt political leadership. In addition, inflation rates typically stay between 2 to 3% annually in a healthy range. And typically the consumer price index is a good indicator of inflation for the average cost of goods consumed per consumer household. And so in 2019, Venezuela was astronomically higher than it should have been in terms of what is sustainable. It was not sustainable, and it was about 345 million %, according to Trading Economics as well as the World Bank. And so, CPI shows this average change in the cost of a basket of goods. And so, compared to the United Kingdom, 3.4 million % versus 122% in the UK, you can see that their costs were just way higher than developed countries such as America or the UK. All right, and then in terms of the unemployment rate, ideally this should be between 3.5% to 6%. And so Venezuela is reported to be sitting around 6.5% unemployed. However, something to consider is that this number does not necessarily take into account the mass exodus of individuals who fled the country as discouraged workers, which is estimated to be about 6 million since 2014 through this year. And so this number is probably missing, pretty important information. So, yeah, let's see. All right, in terms of government for part 2, the type is it's a federal presidential republic. So they still have a president, but they're not considered a free market economy in terms of the World Factbook. They did receive their independence in July 5th of 1811, according to the U.S. Department of State, and they do have a constitution, which is considered the absolute, law of the land, with their government, which was formed under their new constitution in 1999 as the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. It was recently amended in 2009 as well. Some of their major branches of government are their executive, legislative branches, and then also their Federal Council of Ministers, which is what they call their cabinet, and then their judicial branch, electoral, and their citizen powers. So their current interim president is Juan Guaido, and he is an interim president, as their current president is actually President Maduro, and he is considered, in the country to be the head of government and the chief of state. However, the U.S. does not accept him as the head of state due to ongoing concerns over whether or not he actually won the election. Let's see, there is currently 277 seats in the executive branch, with 3 seats, only 3 reserved for native Venezuelan citizens, and most of those are scheduled for 5-year terms, including the presidency. Under the legislative branch, there's the Unicameral National Assembly, and that's the title for their legislative branch. And let's see, their cabinet is 5 seats, and then this usually lasts only as long as the presidential term lasts. So it's about 6 years. Their judicial branch is considered their Supreme Court, and there are 32 members elected by their Congress. These usually last about 7 years as well. And let's see, their National Electoral Council. There are typically 5 seats, and it's supposed to be balanced from members across society with 7-year terms. And then they also have citizen powers, such as their Attorney General and their Comptroller. And there are 2 seats that are elected by Congress for 7-year terms. So they do have a very complex system. And so another part of part 2 is the fiscal policy and the monetary policy. So their fiscal policy includes a few responsible parties, including their president under the executive branch and then the National Assembly under their legislative branch. Some of the major roles and functions are that they manage state financial management and then their economic decision making together through both the economic policies for fiscal and monetary policy. Some of the goals are to develop and execute a balanced multi-year budget framework for their fiscal policy with principles such as efficiency, solvency, transparency, responsibility, and fiscal balance, according to the Constitute project for Venezuela, and that's from their constitution, goals taken directly from it. Under their monetary policy for their money supply, the main responsible party is the Central Bank of Venezuela. Major roles taken from their website include to form and execute their monetary policy, and they also regulate credit and interest rates in the financial system, so they monitor all of the exchanges and also the interest rates and the cost to borrow money. And then they also manage the financial payment system as well with those exchanges, and then they set the standards for those operations. In general, major challenges and concerns with the government fiscal and monetary policy are that poor leadership is leading to poor fiscal health from financial management and power corruption. There has been evidence of the government engaging in violent extrajudicial killings, short-term enforced disappearances of political opposition to President Maduro, and even proof of arbitrary arrests and tortures of its own citizens, as well as government officials, their families, children, and it's gotten pretty out of hand. The economic freedom status reported by the Index of Economic Freedom in 2022 marked Venezuela as one of the world's least economically free nations for more than a decade. And this is due to, major decreases in fiscal health and monetary freedom of the citizens, but also the oppression of many of their voices. And due to, these arbitrary arrests and these extrajudicial killings, the U.S., as I mentioned before, does not recognize President Maduro as the rightful president, and a lot of other nations do not as well, due to this potentially fraudulent election. And so, in 2018, this presidential vote was condemned as fraudulent after they had, I think it was up to 244 political prisoners. And so this it had gone very, just too far. And so there's a lot of poor leadership over the years, just from, the citizens not being able to voice their opinions, and also this continued poor fiscal health and this low economic freedom. All right, so major impacts on the current issues affecting the economy. So major research was performed in order to determine the current situation facing economic development for Venezuela. So some of these major issues that I mentioned before are, ongoing economic instability. Venezuela continues to be heavily reliant on the petroleum industry. So in 2014, more than 90% of the country's earnings were from exports, and they were believed to be from oil. And so when these global prices for oil dropped, demand for this oil dropped too, and that led into devaluation of their, a major part of their currency. And then poor leadership led to continued poor fiscal health when there was continued financial mismanagement and power corruption. As I mentioned before, the government engagement in violent killings outside of their actual judicial system led to these short-term enforced disappearances by their security forces, and they were torturing their own citizens. As a result, they already had this ongoing humanitarian crisis where they were running out of everything. At one point, it was on the news that people couldn't even afford to buy toothpaste because a lot of the things they were getting they weren't actually producing in the country. And so, there's these shortages of basic necessities like fuel, even though they are exporting it. At least fuel that can actually be used, but then also electricity, water, and of course safety and food. And so the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in 2018 estimated approximately 3 million refugees are reported to have migrated to surrounding countries or fled even prior to 2014. Plus an additional 3 million they believe have fled 2014 to today. So they're thinking around 6 million are reported. They don't know how many in total have actually fled in general. And so, their major issues and challenges and concerns, of course, are a huge lack of trust for the Venezuelan leadership. And due to this political corruption, but not just locally, because political opponents are, disqualified, arrested, tortured, and killed, as well as their families, but also regionally in North America, and then globally, Maduro is not recognized as their legitimate leader, which is a huge issue for them, of course, in terms of trade. And then, this continued persecution of any emerging political opponents has really set them back in terms of their growth. So, let's see. Yeah, some examples of issues that will continue to slow growth on productivity are, fear from their citizens. There was evidence of severe beatings with boards, suffocation and submersion in water, and electric shocks, and just horrible things. Just not the kind of thing that 98% of the population as a Christian, a majority of a Christian nation should have to endure. And so, there's a lot of fear, even for these refugees who continue to exit the country. And this has also led to a decreased eligibility of the current labor workforce, since 20% of their population has emigrated since 2014, at least reportedly. And this has led to this continued unmet physiological needs and this reduced quality of life. And so there's not a whole lot of people immigrating into Venezuela. So low innovation. There's not a lot of incentives to stay. A recent poll showed that 2 times as many Venezuelans were reported to be suffering versus thriving based on their standards due to a lack of food and safe water. 8 out of 10 reported to struggle to afford food with their families on a regular basis, and most had a lack of access to basic health care and general nutrition. So there's huge, impacts on their economy. All right. Though their imports currently are approximately about 18.4 billion. They do continue to have strategic alliances with foreign partners in China, the United States, Brazil, Spain, and Mexico. Major imports continue to be, refined petroleum, tires, rice, corn, soybean meal, and wheat. But as I said before, major concerns were, they're not able to produce necessities at an optimum rate for GDP. Exports are valued at about 83.4 billion, with the same foreign partners as before. China, US, Brazil, Spain, and Mexico, in general, very similar to those being imported. And major exports include crude petroleum, and then industrial alcohols, gold, and iron. Major concerns with that is that, they continue to be highly dependent on exports for trade as a major contributor to their GDP. And so this is a one-stop fail or success wave that causes large increases and then major subsequent drops and waves based on the value of oil and global demand. So if, the global price of oil drops, it could be very detrimental to their overall GDP. All right, so their official currency is the bolivar. And it looks like their current exchange rate compared to developed nations is not terrible. It used to be a lot worse. They've shown a positive recovery from October 2021 to now. $1 used to be 4.19 million bolivars, and now $1 is 4.9 million bolivars in 2021, and now it is 8. So that is a really, it looks like they're having a positive comeback by being able to produce and export oil, even though they are continuing to be highly dependent on their export as an export for their major contributor to GDP. All right, so as I said, this positive trend is looking good for Venezuela, even though 17.15% of total GDP is still dependent on trade, and Venezuela has incurred a trade deficit in 2021 of approximately 8.12 billion. As a result, 350% of their GDP is debt. Is also, I guess, it's approximately about 372 billion, which is incurred since 2020. So that being said, that is a large amount of debt. And so figuring out how to leverage that, as investors are using that to figure out how much to invest into the country, and they're looking at whether or not the country is going to be able to make future payments on their debt. They're going to want to make sure that they really crack down on their standards for borrowing costs, and then how much they need to actually yield in the short term and long term to pay that off in a sustainable time. All right. So recommendations for economic development are to continue to develop strategies to strategically align with developed nations, such as NATO members. And NATO members should be encouraged to lobby together to negotiate strategic alliances that leverage free market trade policies on items which Venezuela has comparative advantage, like their oil. For example, policy to reduce strict oil sanctions from Venezuela to trade with Europe and the US. Prior to the pandemic, much of Europe had been reliant on Russian oil prior to the Ukrainian war attacks in 2022 between Russia and Ukraine. And so now there's strict sanctions in the US and all over Europe, and this is causing global prices of oil to increase. So by leveraging, free market economic trade policies on products and services like oil, where they have competitive advantage, this could work out in their favor if oil prices continue to grow. But they should also diversify and figure out what other items they have comparative advantage, so that their GDP contributing factors could also introduce to new markets of trade, so that they don't over rely on oil. They should also renegotiate their terms for their debt and then refinance to lower interest rates, and then restructure their fiscal plans, because they are leveraging 350% debt from 2020. That being said, Venezuela has a severe lack of public information that is updated. Not even the World Fact Book has a truly current status of, the truly dangerous conditions going on. So many citizens are fleeing, and additional global support is needed in order to protect and defend these workers, these field workers that are going into Venezuela, but also the citizens who are being threatened by the current regime. The political system is very corrupt, and we need missionaries who are willing to support and defend these citizens experiencing the brunt of this humanitarian crisis in country, but also worldwide. Until these basic physiological needs can be met for citizens, the workforce will be in grave danger of not being able to sustain itself. And if their enduring labor force does not continue to have these needs met, they will most likely not be eligible to continue. If they don't have water and food, how could they continue? And so by having these strategic alliances with other developed nations, this should significantly contribute to, these overall outputs of gross domestic product, as well as the inputs needed for the total factor of productivity that they need over time. But a critical assumption is that the current Venezuelan leadership must eventually seize power, if they are not the rightful leaders, in order to have these strategic alliances with developed nations who do not recognize their current president. These types of relationships, these strategic global alliances, hold the potential to strengthen global trust as well as local and regional trust from its citizens over time. And so I've just been praying Philippians 4:19 over Venezuela, which is that my God will meet all of their needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. And so I ask that you pray for Venezuela, that we pray for freedom, economic freedom, and breakthrough for the nation, and for the citizens who have escaped. But also, I just pray that the right leaders come into their rightful place. And I thank you for the opportunity to learn about Venezuela and all of their issues going on, and I thank you for opening my eyes. Thank you so much.